back to another episode of Recharging the Human Battery here on AM 950 Radio. Dr. Cinecropia is out, so you know the drill. It's Mandi Dickey, nurse practitioner here, filling in for today. And I decided to bring back another one of those ABCs of concussion. So it's a TBI takeover day again today. Figured why not? It's a good little, possibly rainy weekend here. Good time to talk through concussions again. So again, why am I bringing this series on to our show? It's a really good conversation about what's going on with our brains, what's going on with concussion. It is a silent epidemic, pretty much worldwide at this point. It is not stuck in the United States. It does not affect just one race or gender. It affects everyone equally. So it's an equal opportunity injury here. So when we talk about concussions, it's a matter of, do you have symptoms that are still just unexplained since you had an injury? Did you have some sort of injury and nobody really told you it was a concussion? So some of these things might sound familiar to you, and then just think back, did I have any kind of injury that may have caused this? And again, as we've talked about in previous episodes, you don't have to hit your head, you don't have to lose consciousness to have a concussion. And I have that conversation with my patients on a daily basis now in clinic, trying to figure out what their history of head injury is, because it also is important, that head injury history. So today we're moving on with the ABCs of concussion into letter I. So all of the topics today will start with letter I. Again, might be related to you if you've had a concussion before, might be something that you're experiencing and you didn't know why. So again, think back to what was going on previous to those symptoms starting. And we are coming up on fall sports season. So we're getting close to time when students are going back to their sports that might be an increased risk of concussion. So football starts in the fall, whether we've got youth playing football or if it's adults playing pro or semi-pro. That's all starting up now. The Vikings are starting their training camp. So we are well into football season already, and that's a huge risk for concussion. And then, we're in Minnesota, so right after our fall sports, our winter season starts and things get slippery. So there are ways that we can try to prevent those head injuries. I'll bring that back for a different conversation. But again, just thinking about these things, keep in mind you may or may not have any or all of these symptoms if you've had a concussion. So no two concussions look the same is my other thing with this. Once you've seen one concussion, you've seen one concussion, and I've heard that line from so many concussion specialists lately that I've kind of started to adopt it as well, because no two concussions look the same. There are a lot of similarities as I talk through all this whole alphabet. There's a lot of similarities, but as I'm seeing my patients, my 9 o'clock patient and my 10 o'clock patient don't look the same because their recovery looks very, very different. So looking through these, the first letter that I have, and I'll talk about this one briefly before we head to the break. The first letter is incidence, and this one is a kind of a goofy word because we're talking about just rates of concussion. And if you've been one of those people that's grown up in a time where it wasn't really kind of cool to talk about your diagnosis, you may have been on a sports field playing sports, you got a concussion, you got your bell rung, and your coach asked you, "Are you okay?" You kind of shook it off and you went back onto the field. And nobody really called it that. So not everybody gets a diagnosis of concussion. So when we talk about incidence, it's kind of interesting because we don't know the true numbers. We know that there's an estimated 2.8 to 3.8 million concussions annually in the United States alone. But again, that's estimated. We suspect that there's about 50% more concussions that are even being reported. So that's the first part that I want to kind of tease you with before we go to the break today. And there's going to be so many more things like that today. Talking about incidents, getting into intimacy a little bit. Sorry about that little concussion conversation if it makes you uncomfortable. Independence, so many more I letters that we're going to talk about today. And I hope you have a really good listen to this and you learn something that is valuable to you. So when we come back from the break, more on the letter I in the concussion ABCs. Welcome back from the break here on AM 950. 950 Radio with Recharging the Human Battery. Again, Dr. Sinacropi's out today, so it's just me, Mandi Dickey, doing the TBI takeover, ABCs of concussion today with the letter I. So as we were talking before the break, I just kind of teased you a little bit with the incidence of it. So incidence of concussion, we are estimating 2.8 to 3.8 million concussions annually in the United States. About half of those are sports related. So out of all of the ER visits for concussions, they are calculating that about half of those are sports related. So the other half are not sports related. That's things like falls, car accidents, assaults, all those different things that can happen to cause concussions. There is, again, a lot of research going on questioning that incidence, as I was alluding to before we went to the break, because we don't know if there's more concussions. We're assuming there's more concussions than what's being reported in the research. But then when we're looking at numbers, so in the last several years, we've been seeing a rise in concussions. So is it really a rise in concussions, or are we just diagnosing it now where we didn't used to diagnose it? So that's another question that's being posed in the research all the time is this number actually rising, or are we just getting better at diagnosing it, or more appropriate at diagnosing it? In recent years, there have been several studies that published that somewhere between 40 to 50% of the patients are not recovered at 3 months, which was previously not identified either. So we used to say that, most people got better within a month, and we're realizing now that most people are not getting better in a month. There's a lot of people that continue to have symptoms going on and on after that. And so when we're looking at the CDC research, the CDC has done a ton of research on concussion. They have this wonderful program called Heads Up that educates parents, coaches, students about concussion in sports. They identified that 7 of those 10 ED visits for sports and recreation are related to TBIs in 17 years of old and younger. So we're seeing of that 50% that's sports related, the grand majority of those are under age 17. So we really need to kind of take a look at what we're doing for our youth sports. I think it's been pretty well known in professional sports that they're trying to improve their helmets and trying to do better things to keep their professional athletes out of having permanent deficits. But when we're looking at these kids, it's starting at really young ages. So the top sports that have the highest rates of concussion, we're getting into some of them here this fall. Boys tackle football is number 1, and they do on this list on the CDC split them out for boys and girls because there's different incidents based on gender. So boys tackle football number 1, girls soccer number 2, boys lacrosse number 3, boys ice hockey is next, boys wrestling, girls lacrosse, girls field hockey, girls basketball, boys soccer, and then finally girls softball kind of rounds out that list. So yes, some of the same sports, different genders, but there are some differences, and we can address some of that with our biological differences in size and shape of the neck muscles, the ability to keep balanced on different activities. Our bodies are made differently, so when we look at that, it does put us at a different risk for concussion. There are studies also in Britain and Australia that have looked at this whole mechanism of injury with the gender differences. And they have been identified that same sport between men and women can have gender differences in concussion rates. So the prevention strategies likely need to be different as well. So when we're looking at how to prevent it, what kind of exercise would be helpful for students in these different athletes, or in athletics, it might be important to look at what kind of differences do we need to do between the genders, because there is an important difference there. The fortunate or unfortunate part for some people here is that most of the research that's been done on concussion in sports has been done on male athletes. So you can't always extrapolate that data right over to the females. So we don't know really what's outside of that bubble. We don't know what we don't know there. So a lot of incidence questions still kind of up in the air that we have to address in future research. The next I letter, this one might get a little uncomfortable for people. This one's intimacy. And this is one that I never shy away from because it's just another part of life. And I've made some pretty funny jokes in the past. When I was teaching nursing school, I would talk. There were a couple times I started out my lectures with the old 80s song, Let's Talk About Sex, because it's an important part of life as well. And when we're talking about somebody that's had a head injury, that part of life gets affected also. So some common changes that we see in sexual behavior, people can have a reduced libido or increased libido, erectile problems, inability to orgasm, reduced frequency of sex. So there's a lot of information that can go awry in that intimacy world. There are a lot of factors that come into play. The emotions involved with the person that has the injury, that may include depression, anxiety, stress. All of those can reduce sex drive. That can also affect the family of the person that is injured as well. Medications can dampen libido. Injuries can affect function. Relationship breakdown is very common, and we did talk about this a little bit in a previous episode, but relationship breakdown can cause issues because communication is not quite the same. That person is not quite the same. So a lot of those things come back to haunt that intimate relationship. If there were any prior sexual difficulties, those might be worsened after the brain injury. And then reduced confidence and attractiveness, whether or not there are physical changes. Because of all of those mental changes that occur, the depression and anxiety can affect how attractive a person feels. There are some times that we see inappropriate sexual behavior, not quite as common as the other issues that we've talked about. Some of that can be just hypersexuality, somebody that's focused, kind of hyper-focused on that. Reproductive changes can occur, and we've talked about this a little bit on the show already too. Women can have changes in their menstrual cycles, meaning the periods become irregular. It can make it difficult trying to get pregnant afterwards. We did talk about the partner taking on the caregiver role when we talked about letter C in that caregiving discussion. When you take on a different relationship role, that can change the feelings of intimacy in that relationship as well. So when you're now in that caregiver role, it might be difficult to bounce back and forth between the intimate partner and the caregiver. And then other struggles such as finances, communication, all of those can affect the intimate part of a relationship, not just the sex part, but just the whole intimacy in general. And it's important to maintain that romantic relationship regardless of other changes in the relationship, because that is such an important part of your life as well. So it's important for the couple, the injured person and their partner, to schedule opportunities away from other responsibilities. Even if it's just sitting out in nature together, holding hands, sitting on a park bench. Something so you can focus on your relationship and not think about other responsibilities that you have. Schedule date nights. Again, it doesn't have to be anything big, extravagant, just time with just the two of you so that you can refocus on that relationship and try to build some of those things back up again. Thank each other for the assistance in recovery. And that's one thing that my husband and I had to do a lot as well, is I had to start acknowledging everything that he was doing for me, because it made him realize how much I did appreciate it. And a little acknowledgement goes a long way. And that goes both ways too, for the injured person as well as the partner. And then communication. Communication is always the number one breakdown in relationships to begin with. But then when you add somebody in that's got a brain injury and that communication is different, there might be memory problems that cause arguments. I literally had a patient in clinic recently, and we talked about this for a good chunk of our appointment time, because he was having issues with his partner. He was having issues with his child, with his friends, because communication is different and he doesn't always remember those conversations, so that leads to arguments. And that's not an uncommon thing to have happen. So communication is really, really important. I've gotten to the point where I over communicate, because I would talk to one of my sisters or one of my friends about something, and then I would forget to tell my husband, and that can lead to issues as well. So those memory challenges that come after a brain injury can make significant challenges for that intimate relationship. And then if you're not able to do all of these things on your own, if you're still struggling, we did talk about how many relationships break down. It's upwards of 50% or more of marriages that end after a brain injury. There is always couples counseling. That's a great option for people that are struggling after that brain injury, to help you both understand each other and try to fix some of those problems that have broken down during that relationship. Not every relationship has to be thrown away. Some maybe can't get over some of those big hurdles. But I think trying to work on those things, work on the communication, work with a really good couples therapist who has dealt with brain injury in the past would be a really good way to try to salvage what you can from that relationship. So, heavy conversation. Let's move to something maybe slightly heavy, slightly less heavy, I guess. Independence is the next one. Not necessarily really that less heavy, because it's also a really, really good conversation. It's a big thing that can affect people after a brain injury, because that amount of assistance that someone needs will very much depend on the severity of the injury. And I'm not talking that mild, moderate, severe diagnosis that the person got when they got their injury. Because those diagnoses, the mild, moderate, severe at that time, is based on whether or not you lost consciousness, whether or not you had a skull fracture or a head bleed. And that's really as far as those diagnoses go. Somebody that had a, quote, mild TBI, so they didn't lose consciousness, they didn't have a head bleed, they didn't have a skull fracture, they can have severe symptoms that debilitate them in their life. I know, because I was there. But those diagnoses are really kind of misleading because it doesn't really tell you how severe the symptoms are. So that amount of assistance will depend on the severity of the symptoms that the person is experiencing. So likely there will be more assistance needed initially right after the brain injury. And then as the brain is recovering, individuals should be able to regain some of that independence through improved function. Whether or not they get back to their 100% full normal function is yet to be determined. What we typically recommend is a gradual return to that daily routine with work or school. And we recommend those returns before you return to athletic sports. That's not to say that I don't want you walking on a regular basis. So you need to get some kind of physical exercise in there as well, but not that contact sports type of thing that we're thinking of as we're moving into sports season here. The person might require assistive devices or adapted environments, meaning they might require hearing aids or glasses to be able to see and hear the world around them, or they might need dimmer lights. They might need extra break time. They might need quiet spaces that they can go to because things become overstimulating in life. And if you can have those assistive devices, if you can have those adapted environments, that can lead to increased independence. The daily schedule might need to be altered to allow for more independence. I used to be the kind of person who would try to go, and get everything done all in one day. And I realize now that that's not really a good goal because it takes a lot out of you when you're trying to do everything. So you can't try to do too many activities in one day. You might need more assistance throughout the day so that you don't run out of battery or hit your wall, as I've talked about before. So breaking those things up into smaller chunks. Do one activity, take a break. Do another activity, take a break. Or if you're going to do something bigger, ask for assistance with it so that you can still do that activity and do something else in the same day, but not run out of steam because you only have so much battery. We're talking about recharging the human battery on the show all the time, right? You have to stop and take those rest breaks so that you can recharge your battery. You can't keep running on empty. It's not going to work. Some individuals will require ongoing support and adjustments to their lifestyle, which might mean they have to continue therapy for extended periods of time. They might need medications that they didn't need before. They might need other resources such as financial assistance or county assistance with all of that. Support groups are there. There are several different levels of support groups as well. There are some that you can find in person. There are lots that you can find online. And there are specific organizations that have traumatic brain injury support groups, which are phenomenal. Again, locally, we don't have a ton of options. There are some. There's even one for professional individuals who were working in like lawyer, medical field, and they were that higher functioning person, and they want to talk to other people that have been in that same situation. There's a group for that. So you can find your people in a group that can help you recover and help you see the light at the end of the tunnel, as we sometimes say it, because there's still good to be had. It's just hard to find it on your own sometimes. So you need that support group to help you find those good moments. And there's no magic 8 ball that can tell you how long it will take or who's going to be affected more than others. There are some risk factors that increase recovery time, but even with those risk factors, again, as I mentioned before, no 2 concussions will respond the same. And I have had some patients come into my office who have had a ton of risk factors for the likelihood of their concussion to go on for long terms, and they don't. And then I've had some people who had really no other risk factors and no previous concussions. And this one concussion that they got, this one head injury, made a significant impact on their life. So while, yes, there are some of those things that we can say there are increased risk, it's not always the case. So again, no 2 concussions look the same, no 2 respond the same. Yay. Isolation is the next I want to cover. And this one is, again, a little bit interesting because you can take it a couple different ways. Years ago, when we were first talking about how to treat concussion, we used to recommend people to kind of isolate themselves a little bit, stay in a dark room, stay away from everything, other people, have complete brain rest, complete physical rest until the symptoms subsided. This was when we were thinking it only took a few days for people to get better. But this is not the current recommendation, because if we told everybody not to do anything until their symptoms subsided, we would have people that are not doing anything for years because their symptoms do not get better. And the longer you stay in that dark room, the harder it's going to be to get out of it. So we really don't want people isolating themselves like that. The other way that you can look at isolation is the social isolation that occurs when somebody has a brain injury. This part can be very debilitating for the person that's had the injury. And there are many reasons why social isolation might happen. People may choose to isolate themselves because of embarrassment due to their ongoing symptoms, such as speech difficulties or their memory impairment. They might choose to isolate because of overstimulation. Just being in those crowds is too much. They can't tolerate the busy activities or all the busyness around them. And that social situation is very difficult and it causes a lot of fatigue. So they just choose not to go anymore. They may choose to isolate because they feel like others don't understand their condition, which is why I'm doing this whole alphabet and trying to help people understand so that when you have a friend or family member that has a concussion, you might be a little bit more understanding of what's going on because, hey, I've heard this on that radio show. What's that radio show? Oh, yeah, Recharging the Human Battery on AM 950. So take a listen to the symptoms and get some information about what your loved one might be experiencing. And then depression often leads to social isolation. So you have this negative spiral, this downward spiral that people get in because they isolate themselves because of their symptoms, and then they get depressed, and then they isolate themselves even more because of the depression, and then their depression gets worse because of the isolation, and on and on. So how do we manage? How do we stop that downward spiral and get things moving upwards again? Communicate with friends and family. So as the person with the individual, it's really important that you let your friends and family know what you're feeling. I tried hiding a lot of issues from my husband because I didn't want him to know how bad things were for a while. I didn't want him to feel like I was a burden. I didn't want to put more stress on him because he was already taking on so much with our family. And that backfired on me because then he didn't realize how bad I was. So once I started opening up and sharing with him the struggles that I was having, what I was experiencing, he could actually see a little bit more of what I was going through as well. And that helped improve our relationship. So your friends and family often don't know your struggles because they don't see the day-to-day. They might think that you've already gotten back to normal life. I had one of my friends that when I told her I was doing something, I don't remember if it was a social situation or a part-time work thing, that she assumed that I was back to normal function because I was back to activities. And I said, no, I think it was work. It was when I first started working at Hypercharge and I was doing like 9 hours a week. I said, no, that's not normal. I'm not back to normal activities. I'm just back to doing something part-time that my brain can handle. So she hadn't really understood because she wasn't there on the day-to-day. So unless you communicate, people don't understand. And then the other part that's really difficult for a lot of people is asking for help or explaining what you need help with. That sometimes can be difficult because sometimes you don't even know what you need help with. And there were times that in my recovery that I had the same problem. I didn't know what I needed help with, but I could explain what I needed to do. And then other people could help me figure out what they could help with. And that was really helpful. So that asking for help part can bring people closer. When I asked my children for help, when I asked my husband for help, it definitely did improve relationships because they could realize that I was struggling and I couldn't do all of these things individually. And then I realized that no one is really ever created to do everything by themselves. So it's really important that we enact that community so that we can all work together. And as we've talked about previously, unfortunately, some relationships do fade away over time because of social disconnection. And for some of that, we need to be okay with that. There's an old saying that people are in your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And that is a very true statement because not everyone that you meet, not everyone that you like having in your circle is meant to be there forever. Sometimes those people are meant to be there for a season or for a reason, and that's okay. We have to be okay with that change sometimes. So dwelling on that fact of a relationship that may have been lost and all of this is not going to help you recover. Basic bottom line with that one. The last thing that I recommend with that social isolation is seeking support. Again, sometimes support groups are where you need to be surrounded by others who do understand exactly what you're going through. That can be a great outlet for some of these frustrations, for questions on how to improve things and how to get over things. And again, whether it's in person or virtual, it can be very, very helpful. Some of the organizations that I've found that have some really good virtual options are Headway, Hope Survives, and Love Your Brain. They all have those options to connect with other people across the country and even sometimes across the globe. So again, this is not a United States problem. This is a worldwide problem. So you can find people to connect with around the world. Next topic then is identity. And again, another one that's probably a little bit heavy. I have a lot of patients come in and they describe themselves as feeling like a whole different person or a new person, however they want to state it. But either way, when you are affected by a brain injury, you don't feel like yourself anymore. In many aspects of your identity can change after a brain injury. Your personality, your behavior, they can affect your sense of humor, how you interpret the world around you. Cognitive changes can affect how you interpret the world around you also, how you express yourself, whether you can get back to the same job or any job after the injury, and how you interact with others in your world. Physical changes can affect, again, how you participate or work in enjoyable activities like exercise, hobbies, etc., any of that. It can be really, really difficult to adjust and accept these changes, especially early on. And that's where some of that grief comes in that we talked in back in letter G, that loss of sense of self. It is a grieving process when you grieve that loss of that part of you that used to do all the things that you did before your brain injury. And oftentimes people are left trying to figure out who they are now. Sometimes it can be a blessing in disguise. I personally couldn't work as a nurse practitioner for almost 2 years. It took me a long time to get back to practicing like that. And this was a huge blow to my identity. I really didn't realize how much I relied on my career, my identity for who I was until I couldn't do it. I was Mandi NP as a nurse practitioner, but when I couldn't do that, it felt very lonely, very empty. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was going to become after this brain injury. And I know I'm not alone in speaking with this because I've spoken to so many other brain injury survivors who've told me the same thing. They lost who they were. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know what was going to happen after that. And their journey had definitely taken a swift change from what it was previously. I often refer to my post-injury self as the new me, and a lot of my patients will as well, but I've started using the term Mandi 2.0, which I think I've used on the show before, because of all of these changes. I can't necessarily say that all of them are upgrades. Like when your electronic devices, you get upgrades and things are supposed to be better, right? But sometimes they're not. But some of the things that I've gotten from my injury definitely are upgrades. I have all of this knowledge now so I can bring the ABCs of concussion to you all. I didn't know all of these things before. I knew what my medical training taught me, and it was very minimal compared to what I know now in concussion, because that real life experience just has medical training has nothing on real life experience. It's a whole different learning atmosphere, and it forced me to learn new things that I wouldn't have even thought of before. But I've done research on so many different topics now so that I can help my patients better, having been through it myself. I wouldn't have been able to do that without that injury. So as crummy as it was, having it, a lot of good things have come from it. And I've had some other patients that have told me the same thing once they get to that point and they can realize it. And they've realized that they didn't like how busy they were before their injury because they were workaholics. They were doing all these things and they didn't have their priorities really in line. And now since their injury, they've been able to reevaluate their priorities and make more time for their family and make more time for enjoyable things. And I really love when patients get to that point because it is such a huge point in growth when you can see how far you've come and you can see what gifts you've been given by having a major injury. And yes, it is possible to see them as gifts. So how do you manage this whole loss of self and loss of identity? It requires a lot of patience and a lot of kindness to yourself. Normally, we are really good at giving that patience and kindness to our friends, our family, our loved ones. We give them a lot of grace and we tell them to give themselves grace and we don't do it ourselves. So the big thing is giving yourself that grace and giving yourself the acknowledgement that you've gone through a big traumatic injury. Regardless of how that concussion occurred, it was a traumatic injury. And you need to give yourself the same grace that you would tell somebody else to give themselves. You need to talk with your family and friends about how you're feeling. We already talked about that one. They need to understand better what you're going through, and they might have some creative ideas on how to incorporate some of the things that you used to do into the things that you're doing now, just in different ways. So running it by somebody else, they might have a different lens that they're looking through that they can help you find some way to deal with this change. Get support from a counselor with experience in brain injury. And I tell people that all the time. Not all counselors are created the same. Not all the doctors, not all nurse practitioners. None of us are created the same or equal in that. So if you can find somebody who specializes or has really good experience with somebody that has a TBI, that's going to be your best bet for mental health counseling. Pick up a new hobby or skill. And I've had lots of discussions with this with patients as well, trying to figure out what can you do now? Because maybe you don't even like to do the same things you did before your brain injury. So you need to find something new to keep you occupied. For one, it helps interact with your brain. So it helps your brain heal. It helps your brain heal for the long term. Because I'm always telling people to improve your memory, you need to stay active physically, mentally, socially. Mentally part, you need to learn new things. So pick up a new hobby. That's a great way to help your brain heal. And identify your personal values. Take time to take some stock in those values. Sometimes the things that we can no longer do, or maybe we don't longer do them the same as before, maybe we can find other things that represent those same values. Whether it's not the same activity, but it's something kind of like it that still hits that button for you and kind of still fills your bucket. And then it is hard to see, at least initially, but things will get better over time. Even if you don't get back to the way you were before, sometimes you realize, again, that you really don't want to go back to that way that you were before. You still want to have some impact, but you don't want to have the same level of work that you had to put in before, like I did. I did that aha moment. Again, I think I've talked about this on the show before, but before my injury, I was working full time. I also worked a couple part-time things. I had my podcast, my kids. I was training for a marathon. I was doing all the things, so busy all the time. I didn't really sleep very much. And I realized as I had that time to take stock in my values and where I wanted to go from that I didn't want to go back to that same level of busyness. So I finally decided that I didn't want to get back what I had before the injury. I wanted to do something important, but I didn't want to get back to that. So it's that aha moment that's really, really important for you to identify. So I'm still only part-time as a nurse practitioner, but I'm making some huge impacts now. I'm a member of the Minnesota Brain Injury Alliance, which is a phenomenal organization that we have here in Minnesota to offer assistance to brain injured individuals. And if you're in the Wayzata area or you want to drive, this fall I'm doing a Head Injury 101 class. So I'm doing a lot of things. That class is through Wayzata Community Ed. So if you want to look it up, it's on the fall courses that just came out this past week. Head Injury 101. I think it's October 8th, I want to say, a Wednesday evening that I'm teaching that class. So if you're interested and you're in the area, you can come learn in person from me about all of this stuff too. So it's really fun sometimes, and I say that word kind of tongue in cheek, but it can be really fun to re-identify yourself after your injury and make that bigger impact that you wanted to make in a different way. Yes, it can be frustrating to not be able to do what you did before, but finding those new things that mean just as much is also really important. So moving on then, the next I letter I want to talk about is insomnia. And this is one that affects so many people after a brain injury. It is one of the more common symptoms. It can occur in up to 50% of individuals. 50, half of people with a brain injury can have insomnia. What is insomnia? It's that difficulty with falling asleep or staying asleep. It can be either. You have difficulty sleeping when you're supposed to be sleeping, essentially. So whether that's day or night, if you're a day shift, night shift person, whatever time of day that it is you're trying to sleep, you can't get adequate sleep. And it can be caused by damage to the structures involved in sleep regulation in the brain. It can be changes in the neurotransmitters, those hormones that affect our brain. Hormone imbalances in general. Our sex hormones can be affected. That can change your sleep as well. Anxiety, stress, all of those things can affect your sleep. What does it look like? Again, trouble falling asleep, waking up frequently with or without difficulty getting back to sleep, feeling not rested when you wake up in the morning, daytime fatigue, difficulty concentrating because you didn't sleep. So all of those things can look like what insomnia is. And it can lead to more memory troubles, which when somebody's got a brain injury, you already have memory issues. So if you're not sleeping well, you're not going to have good memory either. Sleep is when our brain heals the most. So it is incredibly important to get good sleep. So if you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, I use this reference quite often. If you've seen that movie, at night they have this machine, they put all the marbles through processing, and they go to short-term, long-term, or they were discarded if they were seen unimportant. What's happening in your brain when you sleep at night? So you have that little lever that goes on, and things get processed into either short-term, long-term memory, or unnecessary. We also get rid of toxins in our brain during that time as well. So if you're not getting good sleep, that long-term memory just doesn't really get formed quite as well. So that's why when people say they have short-term memory problems, they can't remember things from moment to moment. It's not getting processed. It's not getting filed appropriately, partly because you're not sleeping well. And then again, that toxin part, if we're not getting rid of those toxins are building up, causing more memory issues, headaches, yada, yada. How do we manage insomnia after a head injury? Sleep hygiene. And when we talk about sleep hygiene, it's a fancy term, meaning you need to go to sleep at the same time and wake up at the same time, regardless of the day of week. Sometimes people say, I want to sleep in on the weekends. Well, you're not really doing your body a good service when you're doing that. Wake up, go to sleep at the same time, regardless of the day of the week. Create a relaxing bedtime routine. That might include drinking some kind of sleepy form of tea, massage, a warm bath, essential oils. Any of those things or all of those things can be good things. Avoid caffeine or alcohol before you go to bed. Both of those can cause problems falling or staying asleep. Regardless of what people think, alcohol does not help you sleep better. It will make you wake up and not be able to fall back to sleep in the middle of the night. Avoid the TV or your phone right before bed, at least an hour, because that blue light can actually mess up your natural melatonin production and your sleep cycle as well. Other things that we can do, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, can be really helpful, especially for that anxiety part. It focuses on those negative thoughts and behaviors that can cause difficulty when you're trying to fall asleep. There are some medications, and in some cases, those are very much needed. I personally prefer to start with melatonin. It's a more natural thing. We create melatonin in our body, so it's essentially like a supplement, but you need to be careful with it. The melts under the tongue tend to be absorbed a lot better, and you don't need as big of a dose. There are some reports that if you have long-term use of melatonin, it can be harmful, but that's really at the higher doses. No one really should be taking more than 10 milligrams of melatonin on a regular basis. When you're doing that, it shuts down your own melatonin production. And then there are medications, prescription medications that can be helpful. We do use those in certain circumstances if we really need them. ideally for about 3 to 6 months. And insomnia is not the only sleep disorder that can be seen, but it's just the most common. So, not done with the eyes yet. We've got 1 or 2 more that we'll talk about when we come back from the break. We'll see how much time we have. But here on AM 950 Radio, Recharging the Human Battery. I'll see you in a moment. Welcome back one last time today for Recharging the Human Battery on AM 950 Radio. Again, Mandi Dickey, we've been talking about the ABCs of concussion today, letter I in this TBI takeover. Lots of things that we've covered already today. The last couple things that I want to talk about here today are pretty short compared to the rest of them. Injury, and this one is really kind of should go without saying that brain injury occurs with a concussion. A concussion is a traumatic brain injury. So when we're talking about these terms, it's important to identify that, again, as I talked about at the beginning of the show, this injury does not require hitting your head. It does not require losing consciousness. So we talk about this coup, contra coup injury that can occur when the coup is when your head hits the first object. So if you are moving forward, you hit the front of your head, that's your coup injury. When your brain sloshes back the other direction, that's your contra coup injury. So we can see injury on both sides of the brain. It's not just a one-sided injury, unfortunately. And blast injuries in the military are like creating 5 to 6 concussions at the same time. So when we're talking to our military personnel who've had these blast injuries, they've been involved in explosions, they had multiple concussions at the same time each time they had one of those explosions go off. So researchers are working on new levels of diagnosis with trauma. Rather than the mild, moderate, severe ratings that I talked about earlier in the show, we're looking at different ways to classify it. Because as I mentioned, those diagnoses are only helpful for the moment of the diagnosis, not really looking at what the symptoms do to affect you long term. And there are so many other symptoms that can be present as we talk about this whole ABCs of concussion, talking about all of the problems that can occur, the symptoms that people can experience. There really is no way to classify it in our current system with the mild, moderate, and severe that we have at the moment. And then the last topic I want to talk about is improvement. And this one is where people get kind of frustrated because improvement will 100% occur if the person survives the individual and the injury. But the rates of improvement, how fast you improve, how much you improve, differs for every person. And as we've talked about, there are risk factors that will increase that recovery time, but they are not guaranteed. So some of those risk factors include things like previous diagnosis of anxiety or depression, previous diagnosis of migraine, and then, of course, previous head injuries. If you've had any of those things, it will have potential for an increased risk of long-term repercussions after your current concussion. Again, as I mentioned earlier, though, it doesn't necessarily mean that. So sometimes people have a long history of concussions and they recover from this new one just fine. And then sometimes people have one big concussion. They didn't have anxiety or depression or sleep apnea or migraines or anything beforehand. And now this one concussion is really debilitating for them. So that improvement is going to be different for every person. And I really try to take a really individualized approach for everybody when they come in because of that, because no two people recover the same, as we've talked about multiple times here today now. The only thing that I can tell people for certain is that the recovery takes time. I wish, even for my own sake, that I could tell patients how long they should expect to have problems, but there really is no guarantee. What I do tell people is that improvement will happen, no matter how slow. And when you find yourself at a plateau, that is not the time to say that, oh, this is what we are, this is where we are forever. It's time to look for a different healing strategy. I went through so many treatments in my recovery. I went to Hypercharge Health, which Dr. Cinecropy and I love that place because it works. I'm a testament to show how much it works. There are so many other treatments. When you hit a plateau, it's time to try something new. Regardless of how long it's been since you've had your head injury, your concussion, there's always something you can do to try to get better. So that improvement, as we talked about in the H's, the last word I talked about there was hope. There is hope. There is improvement. Look for the improvement, find help when you need it, and keep coming back and listening to our show and hearing more about what you can do to help yourself or your friends and family. Here on AM 950 Radio, Recharging the Human Battery. See you next time.